Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Hare Krishna. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 2, Chapter 8, entitled Questions by King Parikshit. We're on text 25. It's January 28th, 2021. So text 25. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim sarasvatim vyatham tato jayamudirayat. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should first offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, to Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Sarasvati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nasta Prayeshva Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavat Yutamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. Okay, so text 25, Atra Pramanam Bhavan Parameshti Yata Atmabu Apare Cha Anutishtanti Orvesham Orvajai Itam Atra Pramanam Hi Bhavan Parameshti Yatatmabu Apare Chanutishtanti Purvesham Purvajai Kritam Atra Pramanam Hi Bhavan Parameshti Yatatmabu Apare Chanutishtanti Purvesham Purvajai Kritam Atra Pramanam Hi Bhavan Parameshti Yatatmabu Apare Chanutishtanti Purvesham Purvajai Kritam
Atra pramanam hi bhavan Parameshti yatatmabu Apare chanutishtanti Purvesham purvajai kritam
Atra pramanam hi bhavan Parameshti yatatmabu Apare chanutishtanti Purvesham purvajai kritam
Atra pramanam hi bhavan Parameshti yatatmabu Aparachanutishtanti Purvesham purvajai kritam
Atra pramana hi bravan.
Atra pramanam hi bhavan.
Paramesti yatha braham.
Paramesti yatatmabhu.
Apare chanutistanti.
Aparichanutistanti.
Purvisham purvajai kritam.
Purvisham purvajayakritam.
Atra pramanam hi bhavan.
Atra pramanam hi bhavan.
Parameshti yahatmabhu.
Paramesti yatatmabu.
Apare chanutishtanti.
Apare chanutishtanti.
Purvesham purvajai kritam.
Purvesham purvajai kritam.
Atra pramanam hi pravan.
Atra pramanam hi bhavan.
Parameshti yatatmabhu.
Parameshti yatatmabu.
Apare chanutishtamti.
Apare chanutishtanti.
Purvasham purvajai kritam.
Purvesham purvajai kritam. Okay, so we are in verse number 25 of chapter 8 of Canto 2 of Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, chapter 8, entitled Questions by King Parikshit, chapter 8, and we're in text 25. Text 25. So we'll go to the word for word. Atra,
Atra.
in this matter.
In this matter.
Pramanam,
Pramanam.
evidential facts.
Evidential facts.
He,
He.
certainly.
Certainly.
Bhavan,
Bhavan.
yourself.
Yourself.
Parameshti,
Parameshti.
Brahma, the creator of the universe.
Brahma, the creator of the universe.
Yata,
Yata.
as.
As.
Atmabhu,
Atmabhu.
born directly from the Lord.
Born directly from the Lord.
Apare,
Apare.
others.
Others.
Cha,
Cha.
only.
Only.
Anutishtanti,
Anutishtanti.
just to follow.
Just to follow.
Purvesham,
Purvisham.
as a matter of custom.
As a matter of custom.
Purvajai,
Purvajai.
knowledge suggested by a previous philosopher.
Knowledge suggested by a previous philosopher.
Kritam,
Kritam.
having been done.
Having been done.
We'll go now to the translation of text 25, chapter 8, canto 2. O great sage, you are as good as Brahma, the original living being. Others follow custom only, as followed by the previous philosophical speculators. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. So Prabhupada writes, it may be argued that Shukadeva Goswami is not the only authority of perfect knowledge and transcendence, because there are many other sages and their followers. Contemporary to Vyasadeva, or even prior to him, there were many other great sages, such as Gautama, Kanada, Jaimini, Kapila, and Astavakra, and all of them have presented a philosophical path by themselves. Patanjali is also one of them, and all these six great rishis have their own way of thinking, exactly like the modern philosophers and mental speculators. The difference between the six philosophical paths put forward by the renowned sages above mentioned and that of Shukadeva Goswami as presented in the Srimad Bhagavatam is that all the six sages mentioned above speak the facts according to their own thinking. But Shukadeva Goswami presents the knowledge which comes down directly from Brahmaji, who is known as Atmabhu, or born of and educated by the almighty personality of Godhead. Vedic transcendental knowledge descends directly from the personality of Godhead. By his mercy, Brahma, the first living being in the universe, was enlightened. And from Brahmaji, Narada was enlightened. And from Narada, Vyas was enlightened. Shukadeva Goswami received such transcendental knowledge directly from his father Vyasadeva. Thus, the knowledge being received from the chain of disciplic succession is perfect. One cannot be a spiritual master in perfection unless and until one has received the same by disciplic succession. That is the secret of receiving transcendental knowledge. The 6 great sages mentioned above may be great thinkers, but their knowledge by mental speculation is not perfect. However perfect an empiric philosopher may be in presenting a philosophical thesis, such knowledge is never perfect because it is produced by an imperfect mind. Such great sages also have their disciplic successions, but they are not authorized because such knowledge does not come directly from the independent supreme personality of Godhead Narayan. No one can be independent except Narayan. Therefore, no one's knowledge can be perfect, for everyone's knowledge is dependent on the flickering mind. Mind is material, and thus knowledge presented by material speculators is never transcendental and can never become perfect. Mundane philosophers, being imperfect in themselves, disagree with other philosophers because a mundane philosopher is not a philosopher at all unless he presents his own theory. Intelligent persons like Maharaj Parikshit do not recognize such mental speculators, however great they may be, but hear from the authorities like Shukadeva Goswami, who is non-different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead by the Parampara system, as is especially stressed in the Bhagavad Gita. Om Ganatimirandasya Gnanchana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamayam Darati Sva Padantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttapadakamalam Shri Guru and Vaisnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raganatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitan Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishkanvitam Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopi Shah Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchan Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpati Yubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanan Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine. Canto 2, Chapter 8, Text 25 of Srimad Bhagavatam. Atra pramanam hi bhavan parameshti yatatmabu apare chanutishtanti purvesham purvajaya kritam. O great sage, you are as good as Brahma, the original living being. Others follow custom only as followed by the previous philosophical speculators. Hare Krishna. Okay. Well, for the sake of continuity, so the last class in our announced programs, I trust you've all been absorbed in Shastra since Sunday. But on Sunday, Malini gave a class, and you spoke about some erudite philosophers that you encountered in your travels and your journeys of self-realization. Yes, you did. So the the sages of the Vedic age mentioned here, and Prabhupada mentioned several of them in the purport, they are even smarter than the fellows that Malini encountered in her adventures. Yeah, no, I know she might just get up and walk out at this point. Anyhow, I'm just telling it like it is, because that's what we do. It's like as it is. That's what we do. So yeah, so these sages from the Vedic age are even smarter than the group there in Amsterdam in the early 80s. So okay, so Prabhupada mentions like Gautama, Kanada, Jamini, Kapil, and Astavakra. Now my point is, the reason why I'm mentioning that is because even these are really amazing sages, and Prabhupada, he's not encouraging us to follow them. He's not encouraging us to follow them. Okay, so okay, and that, well, it's very interesting very fast purport and verse. So Maharaj Parikshit, he's saying, "Oh great sage, Sukadeva Goswami, you're as good as Brahma, the original living being." So, meaning that we that Sukadeva Goswami, he's simply following, in his own personality, he's following Brahma. He's following Vyasadeva. So by following, then we have the potency. If one follows a bona fide authority, then they're empowered. This is the Aram Param Para Praptam Imam Rajashayo Vidu Sakle Neha Mata Yoga Nashta Parantapa. And so now Maharaj Parikshit, he says, others follow custom only, as followed by the previous philosophical speculators. So my understanding of what Maharaj Parikshit is saying is, Maharaj Parikshit, he's not interested in sectarianism. Certainly not like, he's not interested in a sort of like philosophical, political camp, a spiritual, philosophical, I belong to this group. Yes, I'm a Buddhist. I'm a Hare Krishna, right? The Hare Krishna can also become a camp, and then in a sectarian way, I'm dedicated to defend my camp, rather than what he's appreciating about his guru, Sukadeva Goswami. Sukadeva Goswami, he's just interested in truth. He's just interested in truth. I mean, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the chapter 6 of Madhya Lila, it's about the liberation of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, and Gopinath Acharya, who is the brother-in-law of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And Gopinath Acharya, he's a follower of Lord Chaitanya. He understands who Lord Chaitanya is, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Radha Krishna Nayanya, as a combined incarnation of Radha and Krishna. And Gopinath Acharya is speaking to followers of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who's a great philosophical speculator, like the greatest of the day. And Gopinath Acharya, like, he shared his experience and he shared logic, and and then at one point he said that you're just sectarians. You're just trying to defend a point of view. You're not really interested in the truth, in what do the Vedas actually say. So Maharaj Parikshit, yeah, he said, I appreciate you, Sukadeva Goswami. You're not like into defending some camp as being better than another camp. You're committed, you're dedicated to simply give truth, and not to be a philosophical speculator, like I'll do my own thing and then I'll have followers. Simply truth. There's a section in Bhagavad Gita, and yes, where Krishna says, amongst logicians, I am the conclusive truth. Amongst logicians, I am the conclusive truth. So then we can see this in terms of the modes of nature. We can see this in terms of paradigms we use in Safeto sometimes, like lose, win, lose. So the idea of like there could be some who use logic, logicians, rationality, logic, and my goal is to prove that I'm right and you're wrong. And it's not about truth, it's about I'm right and you're wrong. That's like one example, and Prabhupada gives several examples in the purport. So Krishna says that he appears, he's revealed when the goal is I'm not trying to defend or justify or be right or look good in my use of logic. I just want the truth. I just want the truth. Hare Krishna Parampara Prabhu, welcome. So that's win-win. Okay, that's mode of goodness. That's sattva. So, all right. So Prabhupada mentions, and he does this, well, a few times, several times in Prabhupada's teachings, including his purports. He mentions these philosophical, these great philosophers of the Vedic age. They're great philosophers of the Vedic age. We don't hear too much about them because they're not in an authorized parampara. Now, sometimes the names differ, but well, like, okay, Prabhupada specifically mentions Patanjali. Now that's Gautama, Kanada, Jaimini, Kapila, Astavakra, Patanjali. Of them, the one we hear most about from Prabhupada is Patanjali. Some of you, you're in our Bhagavad Gita study group. And in chapter 4 of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4 and chapter 6, Prabhupada, he mentions Patanjali a lot. And he mentions him, for the most part, favorably. So it's a little complex here. It's a little complex. Okay, so Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, like if you go to yoga centers, you'll see Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, like that. And so, I don't have more information than I get from Prabhupada about these sages from the Vedic age. My understanding is most, if not all of them, certainly Patanjali, they certainly base a lot of what they're giving and teaching on Vedas. At the same time, they're speculating and kind of doing their own thing. And like sometimes, like with Shankaracharya, he's known as like he's like the forefather of what's called the impersonalists, the Mayavadis. And sometimes Prabhupada will differentiate Shankaracharya from his followers. It's an important point. And sometimes Prabhupada differentiates Patanjali from his followers. It's an important point. Like because Shankaracharya taught what he taught. And then Shankaracharya also taught Narayana Provyatat, that ultimately Bhagavan, the Supreme Person Narayan, is the source of everything. Bhaja Govinda, Mudamate. Like on his deathbed, Shankaracharya says, my foolish disciples, just worship Govinda, worship Govinda, worship Govinda. Shankaracharya wrote that Jagannatha Swami Nayana Patagami Bhava Tume. He wrote these are beautiful prayers. He wrote the Govindastakam about Mother Yashoda. So he's like very devotional if you really look into it. But you don't get that from his followers for the most part. So there's some complexity here, and it's important complexity, especially if we want to know our tradition and know our line. And if we've kind of been around for a while, we want to understand distinctions. What I mean is like, okay, so we have our parampara. So we want to know, like, who is Bhakti Siddhanta? Who is Bhakti Vinod? who is Raghunath Das Goswami? We're not going to get on into it, but this is our parampara. Okay. Yeah, Arjuna, Shukadev Goswami, they're not like listed in the list of 32 of the parampara at the end of the introduction to Bhagavad Gita. Still, their conclusion, their life is completely aligned with our line of disciplic succession in Bhakti Yoga, Krishna consciousness. And then sometimes we hear about other bona fide Vaishnav Paramparats, like the one coming through Lakshmi Devi, through, it's called the Sri Sampradaya, through Ramanujacharya. There's the Shiva Sampradaya, and there's acharyas from several hundred years ago from other paramparas like Vishnu Swami and Nibarka Acharya. So we at least want to know these names and where they stand and where they fit. And Prabhupada will often reference other acharyas from other bona fide Vaishnava paramparas. Okay, then you get personalities like Shankaracharya and Buddha. And for the most part, they taught lots of nonsense. For the most part, they deny the existence of the personality of Godhead. They deny the Buddha denied the existence of the soul itself. Okay, at the same time, we don't want to dishonor them personally, because both, like Shankaracharya is an incarnation of Lord Shiva. Buddha is an empowered, he's like Prabhupada or Jesus. He's an empowered, he's a jiva soul, but he's empowered. And so Buddha and Shankaracharya, they were empowered to give particular philosophies at different times. And there's a whole history to that. And about 2 or 3 times per year in these classes, we go through that history. I don't think we're going to do it today. But there's a whole history about why they did it. They taught, they preached philosophies that are not aligned with Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam like that, or the Vedic conclusion. And they did it for a reason, and they did it for a godly reason. And so we don't want to criticize them personally, like they were really confused. They had a mission and they did their mission and they were empowered to do it. Okay, all right. And then, so then we have these Vedic sages who Prabhupada mentions sometimes. And Kapila, Jaimini, Kanada, Gautama, Ashtavakra, Patanjali. Now, as far as on a personal level, I don't know, okay? And I don't need to know. So we do know that their teachings are not completely, or in some cases, not very much aligned with authorized parampara. And that's why Maharaj Parikshit's appreciating, Shukadeva Goswami, you're just giving what you heard from your spiritual master. Of course, Shuka Mukha Adamrita Dravya Samyutam. Shukadeva Goswami, Shuka means parrot, not a parrot because he's just repeating blindly. But Nigama Kalpadura Galitam Palam, Shuka Mukha Adamrita Dravya Samyutam, Pibata Bhagavatam, Rasamalayan, Mohora Hora Sikabui Bavuka. That's the 3rd verse in the 1st chapter of the 1st canto of Bhagavatam. O expert and thoughtful man, relish Srimad Bhagavatam. It emanated from the lips of Srila Shukadev Goswami. Therefore, the fruit of Bhagavatam has become even tastier, although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. So apparently, a special quality of certain birds, the parrot, is that when they put their beak in a fruit, the fruit becomes even sweeter. So Shukadev, he was just repeating Bhagavatam with his own realizations, and he made it even sweeter than he heard it from Vyasadeva. And we can expand that principle. And it's even sweeter when we hear it from Srila Prabhupada. So that's the ever-increasing nature of spiritual life. So these personalities, they're definitely really smart. They're great sages, great philosophers. Great doesn't mean that they're coming in an authorized line. And so whether they're just really intelligent philosophers who had some material illusion and did their own thing, or whether they also had their Jaimini, Patanjali, whether they had a particular mission like Buddha and Shankaracharya, and they were sent by Krishna, God, to do some philosophy sort of based on the Vedas, but also speculative for, I'm not sure about that. I don't hear about that from Srila Prabhupada. We don't need to know. Now, there is a purport in the first chapter of the first canto of Bhagavatam, an early purport in Bhagavatam, first chapter. And Prabhupada says that to sit on the Vyasasana means like to lead class on Srimad Bhagavatam. To lead class on Srimad Bhagavatam, one should be familiar with the philosophies of these 6 philosophers. Now, my understanding is that that's not necessarily meaning that, oh, we should go read at least a few books from Jaimini and Kanada and Gautama. I don't think that's essentially what Prabhupada's saying there. He's saying, like, whether we've, studied books from them or not. And the general principle is, like, if we went to start studying their books because they're really smart, like Shankaracharya, we might get confused. We might get deviated from the path. So we want to be cautious about that. But the idea is we want to know the different philosophies, just like, and then we want to see what aspects of them are aligned with Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, the Vedic conclusion given by Lord Chaitanya of inconceivable and simultaneous oneness and difference, what's aligned, what's incomplete, what's a deviation. And we don't need, just like oftentimes, Srila Prabhupada, he would be asked about, what do you think of, and the guest or the devotee would say the name. And Prabhupada would respond with an open-ended question. What does he say? Okay, like Prabhupada's uninterested in the name. What's the philosophy? Actually, there's, this is a little well-known story around. So, Bob Cohen of Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. Maybe it's in that book. I haven't read that book for a few decades. Bob Cohen, Brahmatirtha Das. So in his he was a Peace Corps worker in India, and he came to see Prabhupada in Mayapur in 1975, was it 75, 76? And the conversation, he was asking questions and Prabhupada was responding, and Prabhupada wanted that turned into a book. It became the book Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. Well, and anyhow, I don't know if it's in that book, but Brahmatirtha he shared with me and others, that at one point, when one of his early meetings with Prabhupada, he asked Prabhupada, because Prabhupada was speaking on some aspect of philosophy, and Brahmatirtha, he was Bob Cohen at the time, he said, what about the Buddha? So Prabhupada responded, what does the Buddha say? And then he was completely defeated, because his goal was he thought that would be like an intelligent, he would appear very intelligent. Like, isn't that an intelligent thing to say? What about the Buddha? And then Prabhupada asked, okay, what does the Buddha say? And of course he had no idea what the Buddha actually said. So it's like, look what time it's going to be. I probably need to get going. Okay, so, all right. So, yeah, if we look like so these philosophers, they're speculative, somewhat based on the Vedas. Again, in many places in Bhagavad Gita and other places, Prabhupada speaks quite favorably about Patanjali and aspects of his philosophy. And Prabhupada makes it clear. That like if in the modern day yoga centers, if they actually followed Patanjali because it's quite an austere system. If they actually followed Patanjali, it would be several steps up if they actually followed. Okay. Still, all in all, that, okay, for the most part, these philosophers here, they're not accepting personal theism, where someone who's following them won't make much, if any, progress towards Savai Pumsam Piro Dharmo Yato Bhakti Hokshaje Ahetukya Prititaya Yatma Suprasiddhati. The supreme occupation, the supreme dharma for all living entities is that by which one comes to loving devotional service to the transcendent Lord. Such service must be uninterrupted and unmotivated to completely satisfy the self. That's our clear intention verse, that if we have clear intention on the spiritual platform to serve Krishna, nothing can get in the way. So will these followers, will these philosophies of these different speculators, will they truly move someone to the deep, unshakable satisfaction of the self? Probably not. Probably not. So when Prabhupada says one should know these 6 philosophical theses to sit on the Bhagavatam, it means that any point we want to be able to address it with logic, philosophy, as Prabhupada's followers. We want to be able to address, explain, respond to any point with logic, with reference to Shastra, that's the revealed scriptures, and with personal experience, all 3. And we can look at ourselves on any point of the philosophy, point of the teachings, where am I strong? Where am I would have no idea what to respond if someone asked me that. So then that's a direction for our growth, spiritually and philosophically. So for example, okay, again, I don't know more than what Prabhupada gives us about these philosophers, but with Jaimini, we hear Jaimini presented a sort of karma mimamsa philosophy, karma mimamsa. So that's the bad philosophy that Krishna preached to his father. Might seem contradictory, because like Krishna, he's like the origin of the, we're serving Krishna, he is truth himself, and sometimes he preaches bad philosophy. It's his idea of fun. It just is. So he speaks to his father in the Govardhan Hill pastime. It's a fun pastime. It's chapters 24 to 27 in Krishna book, the 10th canto of Bhagavatam. And so Prabhupada explains that Krishna is essentially speaking the karma mimamsa philosophy of Jaimini. Okay, so we don't need to become scholars in Jaimini, but we can say, okay, like it's the common saying, work like everything depends on you, and pray like everything depends on Krishna. So the karma mimamsa philosophy, it essentially emphasizes the work like everything depends on you. And it's incomplete where because it's saying, yeah, like God, demigods, they don't matter. You just work like everything depends on you. All right, so there's a lot missing, because then there's 5 factors in all action. There is us, our work, our effort, that is a factor. The ultimate factor is super soul. I'm just giving this as an example of we want to become familiar with the basic principles, just like, okay, I forget which ones, but like Gautama, Kanada, Kapila, okay, like one or more of them, they're presenting that at the core of everything is matter. Okay, just like, yeah, so Prabhupada would sometimes be asked, and they say, well, what do they say? So it's not like Prabhupada was reading all of the philosophy of science journals from the 1970s, but he would say, what do they say? And Prabhupada would say, oh, okay, so they're essentially saying life comes from matter, right? So let's take a look at it. So one or more of these philosophies, they are life comes from matter. Krishna deals with that in Bhagavad Gita. Atachainam nitya jatam nityam va manyase mitam tatapi tvam mahabaho nainam sochitu marhasi. Krishna says, okay, Arjuna, even if you think that life, consciousness is an epiphenomenon of combination of matter, still you have no reason to lament. And Krishna explains why. And so this epiphenomena idea, it's not new. It's not like new from the 1980s. So Kannada was teaching it. And then we can just think, okay, so it's sort of like saying, okay, when you have ignorance blended in a certain way, knowledge pops out. No, it doesn't. Knowledge is an entity unto itself. It's not an epiphenomena of ignorance. Or it's like if you're saying, if you have pitch darkness combined in a certain way, then light happens. No, it doesn't. No, light's a separate entity. Light's a separate entity. So similarly, the soul's a separate entity. Astavakra, he appears in Bhagavatam, at least in the purports. I forget whether in the verses. There's some funny pastimes with Astavakra, and he's kind of like a pre-Shankaracharya Mayavadi. And the idea is the ultimate truth is the undifferentiated oneness with no energies, no potencies. And then, because then there are places in the Vedas where it says things like Tattvamasi, you are Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, you are Brahman. An example could be given, because there's truth in that. Just like there's truth in Karma Mimoksha philosophy, our work is one of the causes, but well, let's not forget the super soul, and let's not forget circumstance. Just like, let's say if we're at the beach, and we might be at the beach and we might point, and we point at the ocean and we go, that's the ocean. Now, all we're really pointing at in our vision, we can maybe see a few miles of ocean, right? Our vision on a few miles, that's the ocean. And it's a true statement, that's the ocean. But actually, the ocean is thousands of miles on the beach, and then thousands of miles in width, and 40,000 feet deep. Okay, but still, so similarly, the Vedas might sometimes kind of like point at the spirit soul and say, you are Brahman. And it's true, we are part of Brahman. Okay, so you can take that one statement to misunderstand it as the spirit soul is the supreme Brahman. We just forgot it. It's like that, those 2 miles of ocean that we see on the surface. It's not the whole ocean, but still it's not incorrect to say that's the ocean. So the Vedas do that sometimes, and then philosophers like Astavakra speculate in ways that like that little stretch of ocean is the full ocean. The spirit soul is the para-Brahman, which we're not. So I'm just giving this as ideas like, yeah, Prabhupada's not saying we need to study all the books of these philosophers before we sit on the Vyasa-san. He is saying that we want to know the conclusion, that the conclusion of the Vedas is Krishna. And we want to be able, with logic, personal experience, Vedic reference, to see where different points of view, how they serve and support or deviate from that conclusion. That's their Ete Chamstakla Pumsam Krishnastu Bhagavan Svayam, that the source of all incarnations, the source of all spiritual material energies, that's Sri Krishna, and that's the essential purpose of Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, to bring us towards that devotional service to Sri Krishna through serving through an authorized parampara, serving through a pure representative of Krishna. There's many places where Krishna says, one who regards himself as my devotee is not my devotee. One who sees himself as the servant of my devotee, he is my devotee. So Chakudan Dilo Ye Janme Janme Prabhu say. So we endeavor, that the meaning there is he opens our darkened eyes and fills our heart with transcendental knowledge. He is my Lord, birth after birth. So we endeavor in our line, the same essential line as Shukadeva Goswami Maharaj Parikshit. We endeavor to cultivate a desire to simply serve Prabhupada in his mission, birth after birth. And to the extent that we actually cultivate that, then Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is very, very pleased with us. He's very pleased with us. So it's not, when I say, we started the class, how Maharaj Parikshit is appreciating the non-sectarianism of Shukadeva Goswami. And yeah, I know I want to be non-sectarian, and if I'm coming off as not as sectarian in some way, then I want honest feedback about it. Meaning, like, non-sectarian means like I'm really, like I want to like truly, I like Krishna consciousness is never stagnant. Search for truth, the spirit of discovery, never stagnant, always alive, always that childlike spirit of discovery. And we're not into like defending a position. We're into, you have a different point of view. Okay, let's discuss it for the goal of deepening our realization of truth. And I know that whatever spark of spirit that's in me, that brought me to Krishna consciousness and chanting Hare Krishna. Because, actually, as many of you are aware, shortly after I sort of committed to this process with some seriousness, I actually got kidnapped. I was 23 years old, meaning like it was not a popular decision, but I was like, well, my search for truth has taken me here, and I'm still open. Like if someone, I hope I'm more open than ever. If someone wants to show me something that makes more sense from an experiential point of view, rational point of view, philosophy, logic, I'm open, and I'll put Bhagavatam away and follow the. And similarly within the Krishna consciousness movement, to come to stances and conclusions like Srila Prabhupada is 100% completely available to serve as a current link to the Parampara. Right? I've gotten vilified and kicked out of many places, but like, what can I do? That's what seems to make sense based on everything I'm reading from Prabhupada and experience and logic. Okay. And I'm open to see how, what I've been writing about that for the past 23 years is completely wrong. I'm still open like that. So that spirit of Maharaj Parikshit, he's appreciating. Shukadeva Goswami, you're not into some philosophical camp. Right? There's in Bhagavad Gita, in one of the purports, Prabhupada writes, there's the personalist, there's the impersonalist, and there's the devotees. Meaning the devotee, they're not in this camp or that camp. The devotees appreciate all aspects of Krishna, all aspects of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, including this sliver of the ocean, including the sun rays and the sun globe, and the energetic oneness and the personality of Godhead. Aham sarvasya prabhavo matasarvam pravartate timat vabhajantimam buddha bhava samanvita. So this verse reads, text 25, chapter 8, canto 2. Atra pramanam hi bhavan parameshti yatatmabu apare chanutishtanti purvesham purvajai kritam. O great sage, you're as good as Brahma, the original living being. Others follow custom only as followed by the previous philosophical speculators. Hare Krishna, thanks for your attention. Thank you. Thanks for your presence. I welcome at this time, if anyone has any comments or questions you'd like to ask or share. Anandini.
Yes, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
I appreciate very much this point about commitment to truth, and like no matter what what the community says or the whatever says, like this true, authentic search for truth. I find that very, very powerful and inspiring, and like responsible, like being responsible to what's presented to me as truth or as absolute truth.
Yeah.
And and I'm also getting more understanding how Srila Prabhupada was like really considering other philosophers, respectfully considering what they're saying, and then giving his his or Krishna's I don't know, point of, not point of view, but like, and also I get it's not directly in this purport, but the exchange we had from Chaitanya Charitamrita group about the Prabhupada references so many other commentators of the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Yeah.
So that helps me to really like trust that this is like, it's a Prabhupada is really careful in his research, and there's a doubt I have for some time, and perhaps it can be resolved in this connection, because I often hear that no one before Srila Prabhupada was able to bring Krishna consciousness to Europe. That's how I understand this. And then recently I discovered Walter Eidelitz. He's an Austrian man, and he went to India and he met Bhaktisiddhanta, and he studied with Bhaktisiddhanta, or he listened to him, and he got initiated by a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta, and his name is Vamandev Das. Vamandev Das, and he came back to Europe and he wrote books about Krishna consciousness, about Lord Chaitanya, and he chanted, and so there's this doubt. What does this mean? No one before was successful, because there seemed to be like other Vaishnavas did come and they did have some effect.
Yeah, okay. I appreciate all parts of your sharing, Anandini. And okay, well, I appreciate it. Sounds like it's a somewhat, you're sort of like realizing more and more what a scholarly basis Srila Prabhupada was coming from. And because we had some correspondence exchange recently that, there's this like version of the Bhagavatam that includes the commentaries of the 7, 8, or 10 major Vaishnava commentators from different sampradayas, not all Brahma sampradaya. And Prabhupada, there's pictures of Bhaktisiddhanta with like that Bhagavatam book, pictures of Prabhupada with that. And and right now I'm reading again through the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. That's where we are in our course. And I'm really appreciating, Prabhupada really seems to know Patanjali. Like, and I'm not saying like I'm going to start reading books of Patanjali, but Prabhupada, he really seems to know him, and he's appreciating him and seeing where he fits into Bhagavad Gita. There are some followers of Prabhupada who are writing books about Patanjali and his sutras to show how the ultimate goal is bhakti. It's not my service, but I do have some friends who are writing books, friends who are professors in the universities, things like that. So I mean, Prabhupada, the Goswamis and the Ramargava Acharya, Sridhar Swami, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Prabhupada was just completely learned in all these commentaries on Bhagavatam and Upanishads, and especially Bhagavatam. That's why the Gaudiya Math gave Prabhupada the name Bhakti, the devotion, the pure devotion, and Vedanta, really scholarly. He was the greatest Vedic scholar of the time. And I appreciate how you're appreciating that, because in one sense, my sense of you, Anandini, since we know each other, you haven't so much needed like that base in the philosophical rigorousness and scholarship and comparisons. You kind of naturally accept these stories, but you know that much of the world will see them as some sort of fairy stories, some sort of
naive
fairy.
enough to just believe.
What's that? What's that?
I'm naive enough to just believe.
Yeah. However, yeah, either pure enough, naive enough, however you want to put it. But that's the point. So that's a quality. But for much of the world, this is some sort of fairy stories. But then, like, this is rigorous rationality, philosophy, such a scholarly base. Okay. And then, well, what you're saying is okay. So to say that Prabhupada was the first one to bring Vaishnavism, Krishna consciousness to the West, it's not literally true. It's not literally true. And Prabhupada, we'll talk. You mentioned a name. I'm actually interested if you want to send me by email later to send me that. But basically, because you're talking about a Swiss or German who met Bhaktisiddhanta, got initiated by Bhaktisiddhanta disciple, then came back to Europe. Well, Srila Prabhupada often talks about his German godbrother. I believe his name is Sadananda Swami. Well, he had a different name. So he was a German scholar, and he was actually even in the early lectures when Prabhupada came to the West in 1966 in New York, Prabhupada talks about how there's an Indo-German Sanskrit society where it's like German scholars who are really studying Bhagavad Gita. And so Prabhupada appreciated, especially Germans, also British, but more so the Germans. They were really into the Vedas going back to the 1800s. So Prabhupada, so he had a godbrother who was a scholar. He came to India, he studied different things, and then he was just completely inspired by Bhaktisiddhanta and became a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta. And Bhaktisiddhanta's followers, his disciples, opened at least one temple in England, at least one in Germany. So there was something going on. Back in the 1930s, like that. It's described around 1890, 1900. Well, there was Vivekananda, who's not from a Vaishnava tradition. Vivekananda, he spoke in 1893 at the World Congress of Religions in Chicago. Prabhupada mentions his talk, not very favorably usually. But then around that time, there was a follower of Lord Chaitanya, a Chaitanyite Vaishnav. I don't know, but you can read about it on the internet. And he came to America. Like around 1905 or something. And I imagine he was chanting Hare Krishna, or like that. And how bona fide his line was, I don't know. But there was some Vaishnavism in America and Europe before 1965. There was some, relative to what Prabhupada created. It was just like a tiny drop as far as an effect. It's interesting. We're going into this discussion. It's very interesting because it was like 3 days ago on Monday, I had a conversation with a devotee named Vaisheshika Prabhu, and he's a leader in the ISKCON organization, and it's interesting because one of the philosophers, one of the types of philosophy taught by one of these Vedic sages is called Vaisheshika. Anyhow, but Prabhupada gave this Prabhu the name Vaisheshika Das. And Vaisheshika was saying, it's very interesting of having this conversation, because he was saying that his first connection with Hare Krishna Mahamantra was not Prabhupada or Prabhupada's followers. His first connection with Hare Krishna Mahamantra was Allen Ginsberg. And since I've researched Allen Ginsberg a bit, I said, on the show hosted by William Buckley, right? And so you can find it on YouTube. So William Buckley is he probably passed away. He's a very conservative political commentator, And back in the 60s, like 65, he was running a TV show. And he had Allen Ginsberg. And this was, Allen Ginsberg had gone to India and he found the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And he was an intellectual leader of the hippie beatnik movement. And so Vaisheshika was telling me that he had some university course. He was like 18, 19 years old. He had a very cool professor. And the professor in 1969 or whatever played this video. And you got Allen Ginsberg taking out a sort of harmonium and chanting Hare Krishna. And so Vaisheshika said it did move him in some way. And then his sincerity, Krishna brought him to Srila Prabhupada. And then he's known for many decades as he's distributed millions of Prabhupada's books and inspired others to distribute Prabhupada's books. And so, yeah, it's an example. So now when Prabhupada came to New York in 66, Allen Ginsberg became one of Prabhupada's first friends, and Allen Ginsberg was already famous, and he really helped push forward Prabhupada's movement. But so there was some chanting of Hare Krishna, some Vaishnavism in Europe and America before Prabhupada came on the Jaladuta in 1965. So that is true. Thank you, Anand.
I appreciate your response.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Ramachandra.
Hare Krishna, thank you for class, dear Govinda Prabhu. I wanted to share something and ask a question. Serendipitously, I started reading again Dialectic Spiritualism, which is a book about Prabhupada commenting on all these different philosophers. And it's nice that the very next morning we're reading this verse. And simultaneously, I feel like this long, yearn that I had before Krishna consciousness to get to know all these different philosophers, and I will be very much into philosophy and exploring that realm. And now I feel how I want to do it again, but in a safe way for my spiritual life also. And my question, I guess, is in that context of going to other realms, maybe other hearing what other spiritual masters say or other philosophers, and hearing you saying that, yeah, if there's something better, I will accept it. And I would hear that Prabhupada, he would say that too many times, that, yeah, if you bring us a different version of God or different tattva and it's better, we're not fanatics, we're going to take it. But I'm wondering too, because my mind is very practical also, and I'm thinking, okay, but I took initiation, and what does it mean? Do I wait for next life to try it out, or how does it really work? if I were to decide to embrace another path.
Yeah. Well. Okay. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. So. Yes. I know him. Early in my Krishna conscious career, I read dialectic spiritualism, or at least the version of it then. There's been different editions. And then, as you know, sometimes at our evening programs, I like to read, it's really the source material for dialectic spiritualism, the transcriptions of Prabhupada's conversations about different Western philosophers, because I was really attracted to that. And I took philosophy courses in college and things like that. And so the principle is, yeah, we might go to different places. It's our service to go there, different acharyas, different personal growth books, and different philosophers. And then we're protected to the extent that we process them, see them in the through the pure lenses of our current link to the Parampara. And if we go somewhere and we're not strong enough in Prabhupada's Siddhanta means the conclusion of knowledge. If we're not strong enough in Prabhupada's Siddhanta and we go other places, then we could get bewildered, and it could take us on a slippery slope or a detour for a few weeks or a few lifetimes or like that. So that's the principle. Yeah, that's the principle. And then Well, as far as this openness is a quality of the soul. You know, it's so I appreciate that you said to Prabhupada. Prabhupada said yes. So if you have a different explanation, a different description, let us hear it. We are not fanatics. So it's the open-mindedness of the soul. At the same time, there's 100% complete conviction. Conviction, that means you're closed-minded. No. An example we often give, just like, okay, because of my open-mindedness, I learned that 3 + 3 is 6 when I was 5 years old. Okay. And so I have complete 100% conviction. It's not like I think 3 + 3 is 6, but I'm open to something else. I'm 100% convinced, full confidence. 3 + 3 is 6. And I'm not closed-minded. Like if you want to present some different evidence for a different conclusion, okay, I'm ready to hear, and I have complete conviction. So, okay, so when Prabhupada says that, yeah, he's just, you know, disclosing the natural openness of the spirit soul, and at the same time, it's like an edgy challenge. I like to do that too, not an imitation, but like, yeah, okay, so Bhagavad Gita is like a book, like maybe some smart guy wrote the book, okay, yeah, all right, so fine. So then, all right, so you tell me how much time you need, and either you or your favorite philosopher, and you know, whatever, you got your laptop or whatever, and so you write a philosophical treatise. Oh, not me, I'm not that intelligent. Whatever, you go to your smartest professor, whoever it is, and you come out with something that's 10% as philosophically cogent, internally consistent, externally corresponding with reality. You come up with a philosophical system as amazing as Bhagavad Gita, and then let's see. And if you're not doing that, then it's really just empty words. Oh, anyone could do that. Okay. So just like, okay, I gave the 3 + 3 is 6 example. So for Prabhupada, he's saying, yes, show us something different. For Prabhupada, personal relation with Krishna as the Supreme Personality of God is like 3 + 3 is 6. Still, he's completely open. Okay, like I am sitting here in the same room with Paramparadas. Okay, I'm stating a conclusive truth. Oh, that means you're closed-minded. I'm not closed-minded. If you want to give me evidence that I'm hallucinating, that I'm not sitting in the same room with Paramparadas, I'm open to hear. But actually, I'm like, yeah, there's 0% chance that I'm not sitting in the same room with Paramparadas. 0% chance that 3 + 3 doesn't equal 6, and I'm open-minded. So there's 0% chance that for such a for such a devotee, they're going to need to leave their commitment to their spiritual master. Now, you mentioned, I appreciate that you mentioned that. You made a commitment to Srila Prabhupada as your spiritual master, and that commitment is protective. It's protective because we're not on the platform of Prabhupada with that firm conviction of Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Bhakti Yoga is the ultimate absolute truth, like 3 + 3 is 6. So then, oh, but I want to try this. That looks good. What about Jaimini and Patanjali? Yeah, let me take 5 years to study them. Yeah, our minds could go there. And then that commitment we make at the time of formal initiation, that's very protective. Thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for class, David, and I am appreciating this class. I don't have a question, probably just more just like really receiving it, but I'm really appreciating it because we recently had a talk about Patanjali and I was really inquiring, and you had answered a little bit about that. So I think I'm just like receiving all this information which I was wanting about. So that's really all I wanted to share.
Thanks for sharing, Laura. I appreciate I'm finding a lot of serendipity, just like, because I don't think about Patanjali much. Prabhupada doesn't mention him too much, but Laura just recently asked me about Patanjali. And then just in my personal reading on Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada has a purport a lot about Patanjali. And then here in today's verse, there's Patanjali. So I'm glad I got to speak and share, to put Patanjali in the perspective of our line of parampara. So thanks for sharing, Laura. Any other comments or questions? Yes, parampara.
When Nandini was sharing about with that conversation there. So
Yeah.
When you think of this recently, so there's well, first of all, so originally there was the whole world was Vedic culture.
Yeah.
So Vedic doesn't necessarily equal Vaishnavism, but
right.
Vaishnavism conclusion, Vedic could be so many different things.
Yeah.
So the Vedic, the world, remember, was one Vedic culture. Doesn't mean that everybody was a Vaishnava.
Correct.
But it means, there's 5 Vedic principles. It means that the Vaishnava conclusion was at least available. Yeah. Everywhere in the world, at one time, or at least potentially. So yes. Then, so similarly, like how. So that's like the big scale. And then to go to like India, Vaishnavism was always alive and vibrant. At the same time, it kind of was corrupted and kind of covered over. And then like Bhaktivinoda Thakur rejuvenated it, for India. Yeah. So it's not that there wasn't Krishna consciousness, Lord Chaitanya's, movement happening, but it was kind of covered over and lost, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur rejuvenated it. So, yes. So really, I think it's a little bit of a speculation, but it's based on that thought that I imagine you can find, like the Druze in the Middle East that you have encounters with. And I saw this, it was a Facebook post, so who knows the validity, but at least the idea seemed, that there was this Greek Vaishnava or Vedic, person, and that, so then there was and that's this term Indo-Greek or Vedic Greek or something like that, Indo-Greek connection. And I looked that up, and that's a thing. There's an Indo-Greek connection, and Indo, anytime they put the Indo onto something like Indo-European language, it means that they just don't know, and they just they call for instance like Sanskrit and then the European languages. They just theorized that there must be a proto-Indo-European language that must have been the source of both of those, when in actuality it's that the Sanskrit is the mother of all languages. So so this thing like the Indo-Greek, my assumption is it's probably just a made-up term, and that it's really the Vedic connection that was there. Yeah. That between those regions in the Vedic culture, and so there was some Greeks following Vedic, perhaps even Vaishnavism. Yeah. So that's kind of that's what it made me think of, is that you could probably find there's pockets of the Vedic cultures, still alive and here and there around the world, and that is potential Vaishnavism also.
I appreciate your comments very much. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, our friend, many of you know, Daneshwar Das. He's given class in this program. He's come to our programs, maybe not for 2 years or so. I think he's in Russia now or something. But he wrote a book called something like Divine and Demoniac. I have copies. But the first part of his book is about, he's establishing that in the time of Jesus, the time of the original Jews, that he called them the Vaishnava Jews or something, and he does a lot of scholarly research, and he shows that the original Jews were very Vaishnava. not even like subtle Vedic influences, like really Vaishnava. I appreciate what you said about language. I'm no scholarly linguist, but from what I've read, and I've read a little, that like this whole Proto-Indo-European, it's a language, it's an ancient language for which there's no evidence that it ever existed, but they need to postulate it to avoid admitting that Sanskrit's the mother of all language. And the Druze, so there's Veda culture was predominant. Doesn't necessarily mean pure Vaishnava culture, but Veda culture was predominant, and there's still pockets, and there's so much increasing evidence for that. Thank you.
As an additional note to Parampara Prabhu's comment and Anandini's question and sharing, I remember I've seen this one picture, like a very old painting of, I think that was Queen Catherine from Russia, like maybe 6th, I don't remember which century. I'm gonna find it out, maybe share the painting on the Bhakti Yoga discussion group. But she apparently, when she sent expeditions to India, and they brought back with them like deities and specifically Vishnu worship, and they made like even a temple, and in the painting you can see like a Russian priest with a beard, like performing Aratik.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that all wouldn't surprise me at all, because especially in the Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, more than Roman Catholic, you got a lot of deities going on. You got a lot of images going on. And when Malini and I were in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia in 2015, they took us for a tour in the old churches, and they're really into image. They call them icons, and so there's clearly a lot of deity worship. Some of you heard me tell my time in 1983 when I first came to Middle East, Israel, and that was just around when I was beginning to chant 16 rounds per day. And it was before I started my studies at the Wujs Institute, World Union of Jewish Students, in the Negev Desert in a town called Arad. But I was doing some tour, and they were taking us, and it was before the first Intifada. The first Intifada happened in December 1987. So before then, things were a little more open. So we were on what was called West Bank, Jericho. And the tour guide, there was this ancient synagogue, like the oldest synagogue in the desert, in the Jericho area. And we came in, and again, I'd already been reading some of Prabhupada's books for a few years now, chanting a little bit, taking lots of prasad. So on the floor of this ancient synagogue, there's this mosaic, like a tile mosaic. And it looked like some sort of Greek sun god. And it was a synagogue. And I'd been to synagogues. And in synagogues, you don't see forms of anyone or anything. Like, not just no forms of God. There's no pictures of rabbis. Just there's no form. That's a big thing. So I asked, well, what's this form here on the like? What's going on there? And it was in summer of 1983, and the tour guide said, "Oh, that was just a decoration." So I didn't buy it. I didn't speak up. But no. These ancient Jews, they were worshiping deity. They were worshiping form like that. It was very clear to me. And in fact, the ancient Judaism. If you look at the Bible, there's so much reference to the hand of God, the form of God, the neck of God, the voice of God, personal. And Judaism was a very personalist approach to spiritual life until the Rambam, Rabbi Moses ben Maimonides. And he was a philosopher about 1,000 years ago in Spain. It was just before the Spanish Inquisition. And before that, the Jews were treated good in Spain, and he was the personal physician to the king of Spain. And he was a rabbi. And he was very influenced by Aristotle, the impersonalism of Aristotle. And he gave an Aristotelic Aristotelian interpretation to the Torah. And he wasn't very much accepted in his day, but he had some followers. And within 200 years after the time of the Rambam, Rabbi Moses ben Maimonides, his interpretations became like law. To the point when I studied in a yeshiva in Ir Atika in the old city of Jerusalem in 1983-84, was for a few weeks, 6 weeks or so. But the saying is from Moses to Moses, meaning the two pillars of Jewish philosophy, the original Moses and Moses Maimonides. That's like you can't even question. And so, but till him, there was the straightforward, personal bhakti approach was really emphasized. Jai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai.
Can I ask something?
Okay, yes.
And just like I felt like something was missing for me in the way like in your answer to Anandini, like so in conclusion, like is it bona fide or appropriate to say really that Prabhupada is the one who brought Krishna consciousness to the West? After hearing all these different examples, it seems like Prabhupada was not really the first that brought it.
Technically speaking, he was not the first. Technically speaking, like that, Allen Ginsberg was chanting Hare Krishna like that. So it depends how technical one wants to get. You can say he was the first one who, in any sort of substantial way, brought Krishna consciousness to the West. We can say that he's had 10 million times more effect than anyone who came before him. These are true statements, but if you want to say, well, technically there was a follower in the line of Bhaktisiddhanta who came to Germany. It depends our relationship with language and how much to the letter of the law we want to follow in our different communications.
It's often the language that's used, it spreads the holy name around.
It spread, yeah.
There was people who came, that person in Germany, like Anandini's person in Austria, Allen Ginsberg. But the one who did spread the holy name around the world, the Western world, is Srila Prabhupada. So it's the language that's usually used is spread the holy name.
Thanks for that, Melanie. Yeah, I think I'm like thanks for that. Like thinking of myself, I don't use the term first. I don't emphasize first. Instead, I say in 1965, Prabhupada brought Krishna consciousness to the West. We don't usually get into, well, was he the very first? Was there anyone? Just like Prabhupada brought Krishna consciousness to the West, and he inspired a worldwide Krishna consciousness movement. I don't even say first what to speak of emphasize it. And then if we read some of the testimonies from his disciples, his first disciples who went to England in 1969, Shamasundar, Malati, Yamuna, Gurudas, Mukunda, they visited like the Gaudiya Math that was established there in the 1930s, and they said there was some lady who wouldn't open the door for them. And it said Gaudiya Math. I'm not trying to like be funny or critical, like that's what you can actually read in the biographies. Because Prabhupada said, yes, visit there, see what's going on. And they said there was two ladies and they wouldn't open the door, and it said Gaudiya Math, and that was it. So it's just like, that's the fact that we hear. Now, Prabhupada did send Krishnadas or Shivananda, one of his early disciples, he sent to Germany, and they visited Sadananda, Prabhupada's German godbrother, and there was some connection. It was nice, it was friendly, but again, as you indicate, Mali, there didn't seem to be much of a spirit or results in terms of spreading.
I'd like to just mention, in terms of those results, looking beyond whether a claim is technical or practical, I don't hardly know of anybody that does not trace in the West or around the world outside of India their connection to Krishna consciousness to Prabhupada, not really to these other people. It is very technical to try to do after the fact research and try to find some minor insignificant incidents that, okay, that incident happened, but if Prabhupada never came, we wouldn't even be talking right now. So, I mean, 99.9999, and we don't have the time for me to keep adding nines, trace their connection to Prabhupada. And so many other people who later gurus got people and traveled around the world, I noticed that they're often very busy trying to associate themselves with Prabhupada.
Yeah.
or on the next one after Prabhupada or whatever. There's a lot of, it seemed like Krishna, whatever these other little stories are, Krishna in terms of accomplishment seemed to want to glorify Prabhupada.
Your points are completely excellent, and I like the way he's. Yeah, if it weren't for Prabhupada, we wouldn't be talking about that Allen Ginsberg chanted Hare Krishna or someone in 1905. Your points are excellent. Thanks for sharing that, Gajendra. Excellent points. Hare Krishna, Jai Srila Prabhupada, Jai Srimad Bhagavatam.
Hare Krishna.
Okay. Yeah.